Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about issues when delivering. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, what are the issues in being able to deliver projects on time? Well, usually it is that you don't know the code well enough at the time of planning and so forth. This is one of those reasons why a lot of, well, the trend right now is that you move away from what we call waterfall over to agile practices. And the basic idea, like this is a gross oversimplification, guys, but the basic idea is that it used to be the case that you try to plan everything and then execute, and now you try to plan just a little bit, execute on a first iteration of something, and then you iterate more times, because the idea being that the less scope you have when you're doing work, the easier it is for you to estimate roughly how difficult it's going to be, how long is it going to take, and things like that. And so the reason why you want to do that is because, as you probably can guess, if you're going to build, a small function or a class, or, a small visual component or something like that, it's easier for you to estimate how long that's going to take based on experience than it is if someone asks you, okay, so you're going to build this gigantic, like you're going to build Facebook or TikTok or something like that, like the whole system, because there's so many features and there's so many unknowns for you that it becomes basically impossible for you to know how to estimate that. Because, well, I hope that makes sense, right? The more stuff you have to think about, the harder it is for you to sort of model in your head roughly how it's going to work. And so what usually I find to be the main factors into why things take longer, or why it might be hard to deliver on a certain deadline or something like that, it really comes down to that. It's it's just a question of, do you have the people who are able to basically effectively execute on everything. So something that is, well, it might not be super popular, but I've always told my managers this when they ask, if I can join a project, or can we add more resources and so forth, because we have a certain deadline or we need things to be done, etc., etc. And I always tell them the same thing. It doesn't matter if you add more people, usually. That's not the main factor, because it depends on the problem itself. So there is I can't remember who told me that, but there was someone who made a joke about the idea of fixing labor and unemployment, and there was a friend of mine who said that, well, in China you can fix the problem very easily. You'll just have 400 people milking one cow, and now you've solved unemployment. And the same thing is true here, where you can add 20 developers to the same project, but that's not necessarily going to mean that the work is going to go any faster, because the reality is that any given problem has a fullness level, or a saturation, or a maximum amount of efficient contributors. Like, you can't add more people and then have it go even faster, because, as I like to say, the same friend of mine said that, well, if you have a pregnant woman and you were going to have a baby in a certain amount of time, and if you add more pregnant women, that doesn't mean that the baby is going to come faster. It just means that you're going to have more babies by the end of the same time period. And this is exactly the same sort of situation, where if you have a junior level software developer working on your project, well, then it's going to take longer, and there's going to, because they don't have the experience or talent or so forth, depending on how you look at it, to execute as fast as humanly possible. And then you take a senior, and then you do the same thing. You might get a little bit faster or a lot faster, but this is where I tell people, this is one of those few areas where talent as a software developer makes itself known. Because basically any software developer, regardless of if you're top tier, low tier, mid level, like whatever you are, like depending on however you want to measure it, you will be able to do the job. It's just a question of how long is it going to take. And that's why estimations are very, very difficult, because basically for one person, something might be, a day's worth worth of work. For another person, it might be 3 days or it might be 5 days. It depends on the individual. Guys, I've worked with senior, quote unquote, senior software developers who could not ship a working feature in 8 months. I could ship the same feature in 2 weeks. And so that's why it becomes basically impossible to say that, oh, a deadline is going to be this or that and so forth. This is why it's, to me, a little bit sad that we in software, like, well, in IT, basically, if you didn't know that, usually you get paid based on being a senior, mid-level, junior, or something like that. And there's a little bit of wiggle room for, getting higher compensations or so forth and so forth, depending on whatever gut feeling your manager has. And I wish we could get to a point where we start looking at this as more of how it works in, say, sports, in team sports such as hockey or football or something like that, where the individual player gets paid in proportion to their performance, and sales in some cases work the same way. Because basically, as I'm telling you, that your project, like the end cost of building a system or a product or something like that, might actually be lower, even though the individual salary for a certain individual is higher. Because, as I said, it's a talent type of deal, how fast you're going to get done. It does not matter if it's a senior or a junior or whatever. You can put whatever you want on there, because it comes down to how fast and talented is that specific individual. And that is the main factor that determines how fast you're going to deliver on a certain deadline and so forth and so forth. And then we can absolutely talk about the obvious things, such as if you have third-party dependencies and people are very slow at getting back to you, or you have a lot of bugs or issues, the code might be in a very bad state, and when you're estimating it, you're not really aware of that there's a bunch of legacy and all of these different factors. They all play in, but for me, these are things that everybody kind of understands at a high level, that the state of the project, the support that you're getting and so forth, and domain knowledge, all of these things matter. But fundamentally, even under those circumstances, apart from maybe how good you are, how fast you get responses and how well people support you, these are all, again, talent types of things, because a really truly talented software developer will, even under the worst of circumstances, produce faster than someone who lacks that ability. So what I want you to take away from this is that the main things that are basically an issue when it comes to delivering on a deadline or a project or so forth comes down to the talent level of the individual who is going to do the work. So guys, I've worked with people who are very, very experienced, like they are seniors in every single way, but they simply cannot handle certain situations. I've been in teams, guys, where we had to get rid of people who had over 10 years, X amount of years, these sorts of things, because they simply, even though they've been a senior for years, they could not survive in the environment that we put them in, because they lacked the necessary skill set to adopt the ways of working and handle all the code situations and all this sort of stuff, right? And this is the thing that matters the most when it comes to deadlines. Deadlines is really just about two things. What problem are you solving, and do you have the necessary resources or like the necessary skills to deliver on said project? Like, as I like to say, guys, for a true senior software developer, basically everything is it's a walk in the park. It doesn't matter what it is. They're always going to be able to deliver basically without any issues. But if you put a senior software developer who might be, my favorite one of this is like corporate level enterprise software developers. I'm not saying that this is true for everybody who's working in like a big corporation or something like that, but a lot of seniors are very accustomed to, for example, working with a product manager or like a tester or QA or something like that. They have a lot of support from different types of people where they have to do a very small portion of the work, and then everything else kind of comes down to the the collective talent of everybody else. If you put them in a startup or in a very, very small team where you have basically no resources, like you as a software developer or maybe one or two other people, and there's more focus on that you as a single individual have to handle more of the issues, they completely collapse because they don't know, for example, how to efficiently facilitate a meeting so that they can get all the answers that they need from the stakeholders. They don't know how to do the DevOps things or so forth and so forth. Like, I'm not saying that you have to require that of every single individual, but I hope that you see what I'm going for. Depending on the individual, things will go faster or slower, and it doesn't really matter how many more people that you add, because if you add people at the same talent level, they will still produce at the same speed until, as I said, like, because you reach a certain level of fullness before when you can't add more people, because you can't, even if you add 100 people to the same project, there's only one person who can write the code for a specific function, for example. You can mob code it, but that's not necessarily going to make that things are going faster. It comes down to the talent level, and this is the biggest selling point that I can present to corporations when they're hiring people. Try to look at the individual when it comes to speed and quality and things like that, because it's not about just having a role, a seniority role or something like that. It comes down to that specific individual. Think of it as a football player. Like, every football player basically knows the rules of the sport and can, score a goal, but some people are so good at it that they make the difference in every single football game. If you remove them from the team, you might lose every game. If you have them in the team, you will win every game. And when you start to see things like that, you will start to see that it's really important to have the right person in order to get your project on time. Have a great day.